Greetings! Welcome to our show, Ghosts R N.E.A.R, where we discuss various aspects of the paranormal and paranormal exploration. I am your host, Keith Johnson, the founder of New England Anomalies Research. With me is my co-host, my lovely co-host, Sandra.
Hello there.
And co-founder of N.E.A.R, and our alternate co-host, Scully.
Scully.
So we're glad to have you with us, ladies and gentlemen, here in our studio. And this evening, we have some very special guests that will talk about paranormal exploration. They have done some amazing research. Now, in 1983, cryptozoologist Loren Coleman published a book called Mysterious America. And in this book, he detailed an area, 200 square mile area in western Massachusetts, and coined the phrase, the Bridgewater Triangle. Now, of course, most people are familiar with the Bermuda Triangle, but this is close to home. This is New England. This is the Bridgewater Triangle. And with me is Aaron Cadieux and Manny Famolare. Now, did I say the names right?
Close enough.
Okay.
You nailed mine.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, we're glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
These two men have done a documentary on the Bridgewater Triangle, and I cannot say enough about this documentary. It is nothing less than spectacular. It really covers the Bridgewater Triangle, and it will make you believe that there is something out there, which I truly believe. Sandra and I have been there, and this is really an astounding documentary. So glad to have you with us tonight, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, tell us about how it all came about. What interested you in the Bridgewater Triangle? What made you decide to do a documentary on this particular subject?
Well, growing up as a kid, I was attached to the TV show Unsolved Mysteries.
Unsolved Mysteries.
And Robert
yeah.
Stack's voice went right through me. And my mother knew it, and her friend knew it, and they started telling me about some strange things that were happening in the town that I was living in, East Bridgewater, such as horse and carriage disappearing back in the 1800s, and birds disappearing over Lake Nipponicket, and all sorts of Bigfoot stories. So I remember going to the library and finding out all this information about a Bridgewater resident by the name of Joe DeAndre, who claims allegedly that he saw Bigfoot. And I said, well, this is really interesting. You know, I was only a kid at the time, and I was really into videography at the time, so I kind of put two and two together, and I said, one day I want to make a movie on this. But I never did. Time passed on, and I never did. And then around 2009, late 2009, I started really building a foundation for how I wanted to do it, and I came across Aaron online and saw that he had his own production company, and kind of said, I can't compete with someone who has their own production company because I don't. So we started working together, and we became friends, and kind of the rest is history. We kind of combined our knowledge and our research, and we produced the documentary. So,
Aaron, how did you feel when you were first approached about this subject?
Well, my story is a little different from Manny's. I grew up in Dartmouth, which is about 6 miles down the road from the Freetown State Forest, which is one of the most prominent locations in the Bridgewater Triangle. I had always heard the strange stories surrounding the Freetown State Forest, but never knew that it played into a bigger concept of the Bridgewater Triangle. I went to Fitchburg State College. In 2003, I've always had an interest in Halloween and things that go bump in the night, and I was looking at possible documentary subjects, and I was researching Spidergate Cemetery up in Worcester. And somehow I happened to stumble across Christopher Pittman's website, cellarwalls.com, where he had a whole article about the Bridgewater Triangle. Started reading about it, I said, wow, this is really interesting. It ties into the Freetown State Forest, which I already know about, and it's a local topic. It's an accessible topic, so I decided that I was going to do a short 30-minute documentary on the Bridgewater Triangle. I did that film in college called Inside the Bridgewater Triangle. It was a student film. I didn't own the rights to the music, the imagery, or anything like that, but just that film generated such a cult following, and I was getting requests on a regular basis, can I buy a copy of Inside the Bridgewater Triangle? And I said, I can't sell that to you. But in the back of my mind, I said, when I have more experience in this industry, and when I'm running my own production company, and I'd like to reapproach the Bridgewater Triangle as a real feature-length documentary. So in 2009, I actually had started shooting some stuff for the film, and then came across Manny online, like he said, and learned that he was working on a film, and we kind of pooled our resources to come up with one comprehensive piece.
I see.
So that's how I got into this.
Now, in this documentary, there's at least several familiar faces to us. Several have been actually on our show, guests on our show, Ghosts R N.E.A.R. So to us, it's very, very down home and very familiar. But to those who are not familiar with this region, this will really take you through it, and it is actually very, very eerie when you think that this is actually a reality.
No, we actually have a clip of the trailer that you guys brought along. But before we run that, could you tell our audience about a few of the happenings? What happens in Bridgewater or Triangle that's scary or eerie, interesting?
Well, people say the center of it is the Hockomock Swamp. And when people hear about the Bridgewater Triangle, they either hear about the Hockomock Swamp or the Freetown State Forest. The Freetown State Forest is known for its alleged cult happenings, and the Hockomock Swamp is known for its Thunderbird sightings, Bigfoot sightings, large snake sightings. And I know as a kid, I went in there looking for Bigfoot, and I can tell you there are areas of that swamp that you cannot get to. There's also quicksand in there too.
Wow.
So I think the
Yikes.
majority of the stories like spook lights and all that happen in those two areas, I'd say.
It's really a buffet of the unexplained, more so than just the paranormal. You have, cryptozoological sightings largely focused around the Hockomock Swamp region. You have an elevated level of bizarre crime in the Freetown State Forest. You have a lot of reports of ghost activity, particularly in the town of Rehoboth and in East Bridgewater. And then you have reports of UFOs throughout the entire triangular region. So it's kind of like, the closest thing you can equate it to is the Skinwalker Ranch and just the sheer volume of odd occurrences that are reported there. So it's just like I said, not just the paranormal, but you even have geological and archaeological mysteries, Native American folklore weaved in, urban legend, all that stuff kind of converging in this 200 square mile hotspot.
There seemed to be a lot of Native American thrown in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of tie-in to Native American history, particularly King Philip's War, which for those of you who don't know, was the bloodiest war in American history on a per capita basis. 5% of New England's combined population was killed in this one conflict, and a lot of the major engagements, especially early in the war, took place in areas in and around the Bridgewater Triangle.
Okay, well maybe we can talk about that a little bit more after we run the trailer.
In 1975, I moved from California to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I started picking up on this whole notion that there was an area in southeast Massachusetts that almost was a magnet of weird phenomena, and really noticed it was a triangle.
Whatever it is, we keep talking about this region for some reason.
I certainly think that the Hockomock Swamp serves as the epicenter of activity in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Off in the distance was an extremely large, man-like creature.
I saw something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life.
I saw what appeared to be the Sasquatch creature that I heard about.
Suddenly, I saw something walk. It was about 3 or 4 feet tall. It wanted to get me in its space. This is what I felt like.
A lot of people seem to think that because of King Philip's War, the Native Americans placed a curse on the Bridgewater Triangle region.
One of the greatest paranormal experiences occurred at Anawan Rock. As I turned around, I met the eyes of an older man.
The 1970s in particular were a time of very high UFO activity in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Jerry Lopes and I were heading down to the Rainham Dog, and all of a sudden the stars blotted out in the shape of an arrow as this thing passed overhead.
I almost felt like I could throw a rock at the thing. It seemed that close to me.
I pulled over the Rainham Dog Track parking lot. I'm right under this orb as it's birthing these ships. What I seen was definitely not from this world.
A lot of criminal cult activity happened in the Freetown State Forest.
We had evidence that a ritual was taking place in the state forest. And there was a huge amount of calves with the absence of blood.
This mausoleum was broken into, and juveniles actually stole the head out of here.
They believe that they can gain power by drinking from the skull.
Legends and stories about the Bridgewater Triangle will never stop. Nobody can argue that there isn't something very special about this area.
Something real happened here. There's no other way.
certainly saw some familiar faces there, didn't we?
Many, as you mentioned, have been on our show previous. It's interesting, the little bit the Bigfoot there on your trailer. We apparently, from what I understand, there have been some possible sightings actually here in Rhode Island. What have you discovered about Bigfoot in the Bridgewater Triangle? What sightings have there been, and what do they describe seeing?
The first documented alleged Bigfoot sighting was in 1970. Residents in the Bridgewater area were reporting what some people said was a large bear. And there was a joint coalition of state police and local police that launched this hunt for this bear with dogs and all that. And one of the stories to come out of that bear hunt was that a local police officer was sitting in his cruiser and something came up behind his cruiser and lifted it up off the ground and then dropped it back onto the pavement. And he kind of turned his cruiser around to shine the spotlight on this creature. And he said it wasn't a bear, that it resembled more of a Bigfoot type creature. And one of the interesting things about those reports is that bears, up until recently, had been pretty much eradicated from southeastern Massachusetts. So it's just kind of an interesting report. And then the next most well-known sighting would probably be that of Joseph DeAndre's. I'll let Manny pick it up.
Yeah, there was in 1968, I did have a newspaper article from Bridgewater State College from the Great Hill, they called it the Great Hill Monster. They said a lot of students had seen a large, tall, furry man, and they called it the Great Hill Monster, but we didn't use it. We don't feature it in the film. But that was 1968, and then, yeah, I think Joe DeAndre's.
1970.
Yeah, and who knows how many, there could be ones now, we don't know, but.
I'm a little bit more inclined to think that if these creatures do exist, then they could more possibly exist there where they have some cover. There's not a lot of area in Rhode Island where they could exist. But you actually have a clip on that.
Yeah, I was going to say this would be a perfect time to play that clip. I can give a little background on it.
Yeah,
it's
please do.
An alleged Bigfoot sighting by deceased West Bridgewater resident named John Baker, who allegedly saw this creature while fur trapping on the Hockomock Swamp. And this is that scene from the film.
Okay, let's take a look.
See that.
Deceased West Bridgewater resident John Baker reported his own Bigfoot sighting while fur trapping in the Hockomock Swamp in the early 1980s. A Boston Herald article featured an interview with Baker concerning his encounter. The following are direct quotes from Baker, read by the article's author, Ed Hayward.
Something was following me, and I knew it was big. So I took the boat down a small creek to a dry hill, and it kept moving. I knew it wasn't a human because when it passed by me, I could smell it. It smelled like skunk, musty and dirty, like it lived in the dirt. My heart was up in my throat. To this day, I don't know what it was, but I know I saw it, and it was out there.
Very interesting. Interesting.
That was me twice. That's
Really?
me in the Bigfoot suit.
Oh.
Never took an acting class in my life.
It was interesting shooting that because with our budget, we didn't have an overly convincing Bigfoot suit. I mean, so we kind of shot it in a way that you just get hints of it. And I think it's more or less the same technique Steven Spielberg used with Jaws because the shock wasn't working properly while during
Right.
shooting of Jaws. So it was kind of like one of those less is more type of scenarios, you know.
Exactly.
So how did you decide which, I mean, so much, as you said, it's sort of a melting pot of the paranormal there. How did you decide which occurrences to focus on in your documentary?
We went with a lot of the stories that had first-hand eyewitness accounts. We tried to have as many first-hand eyewitness accounts in this film as possible because it's more intriguing that way. There are some second-hand reports in the film, of course, but one of the things we tried to stay away from was if somebody came to us and said, I saw a Bigfoot in 1970, I saw a ghost in 1975, I saw a UFO in 1980, I saw the Thunderbird in 1992. When they start rattling off every single phenomenon in the Bridgewater Triangle and claim that they've experienced it, they lose their credibility as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I mean, I'm a major skeptic when it comes to all of this stuff. So in order to feature somebody in the film, I thought it was important that it didn't seem like they were just seeking publicity. They were genuine in what they came across.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, was there any time that during the making of this, I know most of the time you were busy with the production and everything, but was there any time being in that area during the shooting of this production that either of you felt, I don't want to say frightened, but at all apprehensive being in this location? Or was it just you were filming the...
Well, we were filming the Mad Trucker of Copacut Road, and a truck did come out of the woods with a big roof rack full of lights and everything, which was rather strange since we were filming that scene, but...
Prior to meeting Manny, I had done some preliminary shooting, and I had filmed Christopher Balzano giving a tour of the Freetown State Forest. This is kind of a long story. I'll make it as compressed as possible. He was supposed to go do a book signing after the tour. He locked his keys in his car in the middle of Freetown State Forest, so we had to call AAA. So we had to wait 2 hours for AAA to come open up his car. Now, Chris lives in Florida, so I figured this is my chance to interview him, and this is probably my only shot. So I said, Chris, while we're waiting for AAA, can we shoot an interview? I said, no problem. We had a battery-operated camera light there. We shot this makeshift interview out in the middle of the Freetown State Forest. During the interview, Chris started talking about the history of King Philip's War and the disappearance of the Wampum Belt, which was presented by the Wampanoag tribe to the colonists as a symbol of their surrender at the end of King Philip's War. The belt has gone missing from history, and Chris Balzano presents the theory that the odd occurrences in the Bridgewater Triangle and the odd occurrences at this location called Anawan Rock in Rehoboth, where the belt was presented to the colonists, the strange activity there and in the Bridgewater Triangle as a whole will continue until the belt is returned to the Wampanoag people. While he was talking about this, the light shut off during the interview, which was a little strange. We got the lights back up and running, and you hear Matt Manise in the background say, Chris, do you realize that while you were talking about the Wampum Belt, the light shut off? And everybody kind of chuckles and thought it was a little spooky. And then Chris jokingly turns as if he's addressing a ghost and says, we hear your message. If I could, I would return it. And as soon as he said that, bam, the light shut off again a second time. And even as a skeptic, that is probably the closest thing that I've ever experienced to what somebody might consider a paranormal occurrence. It was perfectly timed, and it was one of those things that these ghost hunting shows on TV would kill for.
Right.
And it happened completely organically in our film, and you see it in the film.
Wow. That's interesting.
Fascinating.
It was really interesting. It made the hair on my arm stand. I mean, we're already out in the middle of the Freetown State Forest, and even if you're a skeptic, the place has that reputation, so you're already, your imagination's already playing tricks on you, and
then these
just made
things
the hair
start
on my arm
happening.
stand up when that happened. It was really cool.
Gee. I hear a lot of stories about strange lights being seen in the Bridgewater Triangle, and I know you focused a little bit on the UFO phenomenon there, and we do have a clip of that. Do you need to talk about that a little bit before we show it? Or?
The clip pretty much speaks for itself. It's probably the most well-known alleged UFO sighting in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Oh, okay, great. Let's take a look at the clip.
And proved to be the most active period of documented UFO sightings in the history of the Bridgewater Triangle region. A number of news outlets and law enforcement agencies were flooded with reports of large, low-flying UFOs. During that time, former WHDH reporters Jerry Lopes and Steve Sprazia claimed to have witnessed what is arguably the most famous UFO sighting to occur within the Bridgewater Triangle.
Jerry Lopes and I worked at WHDH Radio, and we were heading down to the Rainham dog track, and when we got off 24 onto 106, I noticed this really bright light over the tree line, and the light was coming closer and closer and getting bigger and bigger. And I remember saying to Jerry, what is that over there? So we pulled his vehicle over, and all of a sudden the stars blotted out in the shape of an arrow as this thing passed overhead.
Ironically, I'm a big baseball fan, it looked like a baseball home plate, and there were a series of lights on it.
And it was very, very wide. Perhaps the width of now, we'd say 5 747s wing to wing.
It looked like it had a little cord or something hanging off it, and sparks were coming off of it. I almost felt like I could throw a rock at the thing. It seemed that close to me.
This was pretty much the shape of it. And this thing passed overhead like this. For me, what first attracted me was this light that kind of came into our field of vision, just like that. And as this thing passed overhead, it just kept coming and coming and coming. And the light kept getting bigger and bigger.
I'm an Air Force veteran. I've been in the Air Force for 4.5 years. I've been around a number of different planes, and I said to Steve, that's not one of ours. And it just hovered there for a minute. It looked like it was over a little bit of a field, and the next thing you know, it just kind of just took off.
We continued on to the dog track, and most of the conversation that evening was, what did we see? Up to that point, I had been 100% skeptic. I thought anybody who ever saw these things, they were either crazy or publicity hounds, or there was just something wrong with them in their head altogether. What I didn't realize at the time was that a lot more people had seen it than just Jerry and I.
Interestingly, over the course of the next week, there were a series of spottings, different sightings. It was reported in the papers, reported on the radio station, and at that point, Steve and I decided to come forward and say, hey, we actually saw something.
A couple of days later, an article appears in the Brockton Enterprise. And not only does it have interviews with Jerry and I, but quite a number of other folks in and around the Randolph area who had seen it. But they've got the staff artist take all of our recollections and put together a drawing, an artist's rendition, which looked pretty much like this. And it's like, whoa. I keep looking up because even to this day, as I look up, I can imagine I can see the darn thing. It made that much of an impression on me.
I saw what I saw. I reported what I saw, and I've moved on.
Short on time.
Well, that was interesting, very interesting. Now, I remember my the first time I ever heard of anything, of course it was before it was even called the Bridgewater Triangle that I was aware of, and but in the late 1970s I heard about the Mary Lou Arruda case, of course investigated by our friend Alvin Alves, and what can you tell us about that?
Well, do you want to take this one?
Go.
All right. In 1978, the remains of a 15-year-old Raynham resident, Mary Lou Arruda, were discovered in the Freetown State Forest. The Freetown State Forest, more so than other areas of the Bridgewater Triangle, has a history of an elevated level of criminal activity. Mm-hmm. And it was a very unfortunate case, and a gentleman named James Cadieux was convicted of that crime. And there was a lot of confusion at the time whether it had anything to do with the alleged ritualistic activity that was being discovered in the Freetown State Forest, and it was eventually proven that it had no connection. But we do talk about that case in the Freetown State Forest section of the film to illustrate the increased level of crime in that forest.
Mm-hmm. And you have a clip of that?
Yeah, we have a clip of that.
Sure, we'll view that now.
Although satanic-related crimes and activity often dominate headlines relating to the Freetown State Forest, the area has also been associated with a number of isolated crimes, odd occurrences, and paranormal activity. In 1978, the remains of 15-year-old Raynham resident Mary Lou Arruda were found tied to a tree in the forest.
Mary Lou Arruda was on her bicycle on a dirt road in Raynham, and she was knocked off her bike and kidnapped, brought to the state forest in Freetown, and subsequently murdered. Her body was found 2 months later in November of '78 by 2 dirt bike riders. They said, we found a headless body tied to a tree. It was like a week after Halloween, so I figured it must be a dummy. And they brought me to the area. They wouldn't go near it. They pointed up there, and I walked up the hill, and sure enough, it was a headless body of a female tied to the tree.
Eventually, 32-year-old James Cadieux was tried and convicted of the kidnapping and murder. The death of Mary Lou Arruda is often confused with crimes committed by the Fall River satanic cult.
Although the James Cadieux case, Mary Lou Arruda case had absolutely nothing to do with a satanic crime, unfortunately her body was found near some of that activity.
His defense attorney basically put forth the theory that a cult had killed Arruda and not him. This kind of led to an attaching that he was perhaps involved with a cult, and that's what happened.
I had to testify in that case and say, in my opinion, it had nothing to do with that. He appealed it several times, got 3 or 4 trials, but he's still doing life in prison for that crime.
To me personally, that's always been the most upsetting aspect of the things that have gone on here. And even a local, not a local, but a national TV show has done they didn't mention Bridgewater Triangle, but you can tell they had the cabin and everything, that it was based on that crime and the cult activity there.
Yeah, that's a very sad case, and there's a lot of that, especially in the Freetown State Forest.
Well, before we run out of time, as far as future screenings, local and non-local, distribution dates, what can you tell us for people who are interested in seeing this documentary?
Yeah, we do have a list of screenings on our website, thebridgewatertriangledocumentary.com. If you click on upcoming screenings, you'll find a list there. We're constantly updating it, so.
We have soon, this coming weekend, June 20th and 21st, we have 2 shows back-to-back, both at 7:30 p.m. At the Attleboro Community Theater. You can get tickets by visiting their website, which is available through ours.
Right.
Okay.
And the film is also available on demand through Vimeo. There's a link to watch it on demand on our website, and we've also released the Blu-ray and the DVD of the film, which are also available on our website as well.
Great, great. And I do recommend, by all means, go and see this if there's a live screening where you're going to be present.
Yeah, we always do a question and answer after the local shows.
That's great, because this is truly fascinating. You know, in our short amount of time, we can just touch upon some of the aspects of this, but it's really a fascinating topic, and it's a fascinating, excellent production, guys. You guys have done a great job in this to really bring this subject to the public, and I think you've done a wonderful job doing this.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Very glad to have you.
I just wanted to ask, before we run out of time, what's next for you guys? What is your next topic that you're going to cover, and what's the next documentary going to be about?
Well, I know we're short on time, so I would like to continue working with things such as the Bridgewater Triangle and the paranormal, and I'll let you go because we're
I'm not necessarily a paranormal researcher or an investigator.
Right.
I'm not opposed to another. I'm not opposed to another
Yeah.
paranormal doc, but my next subject I'd like to do is the New Bedford Highway murders of the late 1980s. I think would make for a fascinating documentary.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Very high-profile serial killer case. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And maybe the national TV show will do something on that. It'll take off on it because
maybe
see these things, they get their ideas. And I want to say, Manny, just off topic a bit, you bear an astonishing resemblance to Ed Warren. And those of you who know our friends Ed and Lorraine Warren, because Ed passed away in 2006, but they're featured in the movie The Conjuring. Real life Ed Warren, when he was very young, you bear quite a resemblance to him.
If they ever make a part 2.
Right, exactly.
A sailor uniform? Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah, and I'm sure if Lorraine sees this, a dear friend of ours, I'm sure if she sees this, she'll agree.
I have some acting in the film with the costume on.
Great.
Okay, well, I think we need to wrap this up and say good night for now.
Again, thank you very much for having us. It was a pleasure being here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We'll have to have you on again because I know you're always doing future endeavors, and please, by all means, I highly recommend this documentary. Go see it, it's fascinating.
The BridgewaterTriangleDocumentary.com.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, thank you for joining us, and God bless, be safe.
Good night.